One, three. We're online. Good morning, good afternoon, good part of the day, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today's a large-scale Scrum of New York City meetup session has a very special treat. We have two great guests, Johanna Rothman and Esther Derby. I'm going to do a very quick introduction of both of them. It's a very special treat, and many of you already know them. So first, I'll just give the shout out to Johanna, who has been our, I would say, pretty frequent guest lately. She was here at least a couple of times before. So without any specific, I'm going to keep it simple. She's a pragmatic manager, and that's how we know her. Who helps leaders and organizations to do what's reasonable as far as improving their work. Her main trademark, and which I really like, is pragmatic manager that is practical and humorous. She has written 18 books about many aspects of product development. And if you're interested in her most recent books, blogs, and monthly newsletter subscription, you can find them on Johanna's site, which I'll be also pinging. It's www.jrothman.com. And another very special treat today. For the first time, we have Esther Derby. Hello, Esther. Thank you for joining our event. Esther comes with tons of experience from the industry, almost 4 decades, 4 decades and going of leading, observing, and leading organizational changes. Esther's clients include startups as well as Fortune 500 companies. Esther has been rightfully called one of the most influential voices within Agile community. She started her career as a programmer, as far as I know. However, over the years, she has worn various hats, including the business owner, internal consultant, manager, team leadership roles. And her formal education includes organizational leadership and human system dynamics. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to our great guests. Today is meant to be a very open, very fluid, very non-scripted dialogue. We have a few questions that we have collected from the audience, and I passed them on to both presenters. So this is really not going to be a presentation, it will be a conversation. That's important to take away. I'm not even sure if the ladies have any slides to share. If yes, they will. If not, they'll just have a powerful dialogue, I'm sure. Most likely will be the latter, right? So yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if you have questions for us, please put them in the Slack while Jean tries to do all the behind the scenes possible opening of the chat. Esther, you want to start with is it okay if we start with the first question, or do you want to start somewhere else?
I want to start by telling you that for some reason, the thing that came into my mind this morning when I was walking and thinking about this session was something that workers at McDonald's are admonished with, which is, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. And I think it speaks to that kind of overarching philosophy that we often see in business, that you have to extract the maximum labor out of people, that they should be busy and working at every second, right? And that your profit is tied to people being busy and working every second. But I think in our industry, we need time to take care. We need time to think. We need time to collaborate and build relationships. But I think that is not penetrated management thinking or management training, for that matter. So I think that's one of the things that came through in many of the questions. That there's still this attitude of, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean.
And I really wish that people would really take time to think, as in my experience, the more we have time to think, the more we take time to think, the more likely we are to actually produce a great result, which is what all these admonishments are about.
Mhm.
So if I start with, well, we wanted to talk about from maximum busyness to maximum learning. That's kind of the overall topic. And I think that first question that Jean received was very interesting. So in our organization, there was a lot of emphasis on speed of delivery, efficiency, and productivity. Line managers believe that people work faster and more efficiency when they are placed on component teams, same skill set, silos, than when they are placed on feature teams with multiple skills. What is the best way to convey to our managers the cost and risk of coordination and integration between very fast-moving component teams exceed the benefits of expected speed? So that's the question. Do you want to start off, Esther? You
Well,
want me?
sure. I'll start, and we'll just continue. So it strikes me that on some level, it may look like component teams are faster. It may look that way if you're measuring, how much one individual team gets done, right? It may look fast because you're delaying all of the integration and you're delaying finding all of the errors that come with integration. So it depends on how you're measuring it. You may have the illusion that it's faster. So I think part of it is, how do people measure, productivity, which is notoriously difficult to measure. And what is the time period over which they measure it, right? If the integration errors show up in test, then it may not be associated with, oh, we thought we were going fast, but we just put off all this work. Right. So I think it's a mindset problem compounded by a measurement problem.
So if I take a stab at this, a lot of teams might be managing their cycle time. However, when you have component teams, your done is not done. It's a handoff. So anytime you have a handoff to another team, you need to start measuring from the time somebody started working on that feature, because customers buy features. They do not buy partially done anything, right? They only can buy features. And so when does somebody start on that feature? When does it get to the customer? That's the cycle time. And I suspect that the person who asked this question understands that's the cycle time. So as you said, the measurement, what are they measuring now? And why do they think that measurement is useful? And how can you start to nudge their thinking to the real measurement that actually makes sense?
Yeah. And I find that people are usually so deeply ingrained in this kind of efficiency thinking that it's often very, very hard for people to wrap their minds around the fact that, having a cross-functional team that's working at a feature level, yes, it might seem like it's taking longer because of the learning that's taking place, because of the coordination that's taking place. But, that's because you're doing the integration as you go. But it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that when we have all been, taught into this idea of efficiency thinking and specialization and, breaking things down into the most atomic tasks we can. So I find actually that doing simulations helps people experience it in a way that, kind of jolts their mental system to then say, oh, I can begin to see it. I don't find that talking about it to people is necessarily as helpful. But if I can do a simulation with people, or sometimes if I can just draw with people, like say, okay, so component A, component B, component C, what's the integration versus, if we're working on slices that cross the components. Sometimes that works to help people see it differently, but it really is a matter of shifting a pretty entrenched mindset about efficiency thinking and specialization thinking.
I've had a lot of good results during the pandemic with drawing, because we could not actually get into the same place. And when I ask people to draw their picture of what they think happens, and from their experience, here's what I think actually happens. And I ask team members and managers to draw. Everybody has a different picture. And that by itself really starts to help people see that their own perspective might not be enough for seeing the entire system.
Yeah, that or drawing the what happens when each component gets done and what the lag times are and the handoffs are. That can also be helpful. So visualizing the work in a number of different ways is another way to help people begin to see how the work is flowing through the system. And that, if you just measure, how fast this team is going, you're actually getting a very distorted picture of how the overall system functions.
Yep. Are we ready to go on to the next question?
I'm ready.
Okay. So the next question is, HR norms and values pave the road for heroics and hyper performance. I'm not sure what hyper performance is. Our developers are encouraged to be efficient. There's that word again, and fast moving. This promotes the I culture as opposed to the we culture. And as such, collaboration and mutual support on teams suffers. What empirical evidence and education should be provided to HR to stop promoting bad behaviors?
Well, it would be helpful if they understood something about the dynamics of software development. I mean, much of our work would benefit greatly from moving more slowly and taking more care instead of, move fast and break things, right? Slow down a little to speed up, because you'll spend less time fixing errors. You'll spend, less time, creating big production issues. So that's part of it. Just understanding the dynamics of software development. And there's actually a ton of research about how teams are more effective in the long run. There's a ton of research about that. Of course, I can't cite the particular paper at the moment, but it's out there.
So, there's a couple of things going on. Well, there are many things going on in this particular question. First is the notion that we have to reward people for their individual efforts. And anybody who's been on any software project at all knows it's not an individual thing. We need to collaborate as a team, not just cooperate, but really collaborate to finish a product in any reasonable amount of time. So the more we reinforce single person rewards and single person measurement and single person rewards, the more of this we will get. Because that's what happens. People will move towards what the organization rewards, and they will move away from any perceived punishment, real or imagined. So
the question I often get when I talk about that is, yeah, but we pay people individually, so we have to measure them individually, which is not true. I mean, it's true we pay people individually, but for one thing, it's extraordinarily difficult to tease out one person's contribution unless all of your work is individual and people never talk to anybody else, right? If people are just, I'm doing my work, I'm not talking to anybody else, I'm not learning from anybody else, I'm not collaborating with anybody else, then, maybe you could measure individual contribution, but, their thing without everybody else's thing isn't going to work. So So, it's one of those self-reinforcing cycles where we have very individualized job descriptions, which leads people to, because they're rewarded for, meeting the requirements of that job, it self-reinforces. But, you do not have to do that. I mean, you can look at a team level and then be okay that the contributions are somewhat variable. One person may be great at this, but not so great at another thing. And another person's great at this and not so great. So, it averages out over time. But for some reason, people find that deeply, deeply offensive, that you might actually reward people equally or give people equal raises when, maybe someone was a little bit above or someone was a little bit below, on a level that in most cases is not significant. In most cases, it's not significant. And if it is, if you have someone who is truly not able to do the job, then that's a different problem. But, you look at creating an environment where that team can be effective, and then you do everything you can to support that. And if the team's functioning well, then I don't know that I really care, who's like, a micron better or a micron worse than anyone else on the team. Everybody's bringing a different contribution. So it doesn't even make sense to try to compare them in most cases, in my experience.
Well, we actually have decades of data that says employee performance management actually does way more harm than good. And we have decades that an employee evaluation is almost the worst thing you can do. And that if you want fairness, I think a lot of this comes from a good place on the part of HR, that they want fairness for how they reward people, how the organization rewards people. Okay. If you really want fairness, then it's a lot more useful to look at the pay parity for the various levels of the jobs and who is in which jobs, to look at fairness on a macro level rather than on a micro level. I worked with an organization over the past couple of years to try and help them with their reward system. And they were really stuck on fairness at the team level. We need to make sure everybody is rewarded according to their contributions. And I said, how do you tease those apart? And what kind of difference in rewards are you talking about? And what they were talking about was a difference between anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 a year in the reward system for that particular team. And I said, per person. And I said, that is in the noise. I mean, people will be concerned if you have two people who are supposedly a senior level and their salaries are off by $10,000 or $15,000. That's a significant issue. But $1,500?
But a lot of these reward systems, they will distribute raises that are different. The difference between the raise is 1 or 2 or maybe 3%. So the percentage difference is quite small, but the resentment can be quite large, right? Because it's communicating something about how you're valued. And it's saying, oh no, we value you more than we value you. And oh, you over there, we don't value you much at all. And that's detrimental to teamwork. So I sometimes wonder if the folks who design these systems actually have studied measurement and have actually looked at the research on these issues, because the research, like you said, is super clear. It's super clear. But I think people have a big emotional attachment to, pecking order, because, it's not necessarily fairness, it's pecking order, but and determining, on a fine-grained level, what a differential contribution was, when, you know, that leaves out all of the white space roles that are essential for a team to function, but don't get included in job descriptions.
Right. When was the last time we actually saw facilitation skills for a developer or a tester in the job description?
Or somebody who pays attention to, should we be rushing ahead on this thing? Let's look at the big picture. Or, oh, I noticed that, Fred hasn't said anything for 2 days. Fred, what's going on? And it turns out Fred is having a big issue, and then the team can kind of support things and take care of things. That, all of those white space roles don't get accounted for. And those are super critical to teams. All of that stuff that creates the social glue and, helps the team have perspective, helps the team follow through. Super important.
Yep.
So I wonder, and again, in some ways it comes back to, education and traditional thinking. I wonder, how people in HR are taught about these things and whether they actually read the research.
I suspect that for many of my clients who are on the smaller side, there's one HR person or maybe two who are supposed to do all the roles of HR. And so they're not thinking strategically because they're so caught up in how do we do all the benefits stuff and the recruiting that they are not aware of the research, and they are, or what they learned in their certification does not have any relationship to the research.
Yeah, and it's what's always been done. It's probably what they experienced as employees, and so they just assume that it is the way things are.
Well, and I find also many HR people have never worked as part of a team. They've worked as a work group, but they have not worked as part of a team. And until you have worked as part of a cross-functional team, I think a work group might maybe be able to say, well, this person excels at this thing. But in a cross-functional team, I think that's a lot harder to figure out.
Well, in a work group, just for sake of defining, I think of a work group as a group of people who they're all essentially doing the same job function, and they all have very similar skills, similar education, and their individual characteristics may differ, but they're not working interdependently, right? They may help each other out, they may cooperate, but they are not learning and inventing together every single day, which is what software people do. We're always learning and inventing together as we build a new feature. Every single thing we do is different if you're building products.
Yeah. Okay. Jean, I don't know if we're getting other questions in the Slack, but if so, can you please copy them into the Google Doc?
There were two. Yep, there were at least two that I can pick out. One was from Cindy, another one was from Gyro.
Okay, if you just put them in the Google Doc, please. And you might need to put the link for the Slack into the chat again. So go ahead.
I'll put it in the so I'm above the questions that you have in Google. I'm pasting these two. I'm going to be marking them in green.
Okay.
All right, here we go. You see them.
All right. I can still read them even though they're green. All right. So there's this interesting question. Part of my strategy as a Scrum Master is to encourage self-directed teams growth, is to give recognition when a member takes ownership fully of a task. Do you think that this will encourage more I culture versus encouraging the team to step up their leadership skills?
Yes.
I think so.
Yep. So I wonder if it's a self-directed team, how are they currently doing their work? And if the way they are pulling tasks is working for them, I wonder, and if there's any need to encourage anything different.
I also wonder. So I think that there's another interesting question here, though, and that's about leadership skills and what we perceive as leadership. I think a lot of us grew up with the idea that a leader is out in front, a leader takes control, a leader finds a way to help other people do their jobs, all in service of the leader's objective. And I am pretty sure that you and I do not subscribe to that version of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, leadership is often associated with a position that may come with some power, that may be associated with charisma, force of will, eloquent persuasion, whatever it is, getting other people to do what you want them to do. But I go back to Jerry Weinberg's definition of leadership, which is leadership is the adjusting the environment so that everybody can contribute creatively to solving the problems. And that is not associated with a level in the organization, right? I remember being in a meeting where, a conversation was swirling around and around and around, and the junior programmer in the group said, "Hold on, I'm not following." And there was some initial, kind of, that's just because you're new, kind of dismissal. But he persisted, and so they started to write down what they were talking about. And it turned out everybody was confused. They were talking about, they thought they were talking about 3 things, but they were really talking about 7 different options. So to my mind, what that junior programmer did by saying, I don't understand what's going on, can we write it down? That was leadership, because the whole group was able to work more effectively after it became clear that, oh, we're not really just talking about 3 options, we're talking about 7 options.
Well, and that way, when I think of a team member owning a task from start to end, I don't see how you can do that when you need all the functions in the team. So maybe I'm missing something here. So if I go back to how do we help people create more leadership skills, I think that it's all about how can we see the environment that we're in right now? What would we have to do as individuals to support the team in that environment? How can we ally ourselves with other people to create a better team? So for me, if you're a Scrum Master, my job as a Scrum Master, in my opinion about other Scrum Masters, is it's all about how do you create more teamwork so that the team can have those very challenging discussions and surface those very challenging problems and then solve them as a team. And you and I have both been part of teams where the erstwhile leader changed from moment to moment based on what the team needed.
Yes, it's an emergent property of a team. Is that the leadership emerges, based on what's going on for the team right now, right in this second. Like what the team needs right now might be more ideas, or it might be to narrow down the ideas, or it might be to just take a step back, or to focus on finishing. This is some of the white space roles that I was talking about earlier, and that those are not assigned. They naturally emerge when people feel like that is what's necessary and what's permitted, right? But if people are locked into really individual job descriptions and locked into, well, I have to focus on my work so that I can get, the little bump in salary or get to the next level in the, promotion, then people are less likely to be looking at the whole team and less likely to be stepping into those informal leadership actions that make everything better for the whole team.
Yep. Oh, so this next one is interesting. In some companies, engineers already know that they need to have an SBO, second best offer, to get them counter offered and raise their salary more than, say, 20% or more. Sometimes when getting that SBO, that other offer, they actually leave. So this is a big risk. What is the best way to approach HR for them to consider rebalancing compensation to market rates? I'm going to ask actually a meta question, and you don't have to answer this question. Why would you stay there? I mean, why would you stay at a company that wants to pay people less than what they're worth? Instead of, I mean, HR has access to all kinds of surveys that talk about the relative pay for relative levels all over the world. Why would you stay there? Okay, that was maybe not that
It was a
helpful.
little rant.
Yeah, it was.
Rant. Okay. So I might show them some data about how many people we have lost, and talk about how much time we put into recruiting and interviewing and getting the offer ready for this person. And gosh, now we have to do it again. So I would look at the actual data. I mean, how much is it costing you to have people leave? How much is it costing you to get that close to a hire and then lose it?
And even if this is for people in the organization, the cost to hire an engineer is a generic kind of a term, right? A technical person is often 3 to 4 times their salary. Often 3 to 4 times their salary, sometimes more. So when you think about losing people because of a difference of 20% in salary, and you're wasting all this time trying to hire replacements or not having the people you need when you need them, yeah, the costs are enormous.
It's the old expression is penny wise and pound foolish. And I think there's a lot of practices and organizations that fall under that category, that they're in a very local way, they might save some time or money, but they're actually quite damaging when you look at the whole system. And that's one of them.
And I think that this is another example of the first question that we answered about how managers think about being fast moving, but not seeing the cost of component teams versus feature teams. And the more you think about how long it takes to actually hire somebody and who pays which costs, and I think that that's really an issue.
Well, so I've been thinking about the number of questions that have come up this morning that relate to HR. And I don't think HR pays any of these costs.
No.
So they don't have a robust feedback loop that would let them know that their practices are actually having a detrimental effect on the system overall. And I think, I think HR is trying to make things fair. They're trying to make things efficient, but some of these practices don't actually play out that way and can be quite costly to the organization. But I am curious why there are so many HR questions that are coming up this morning.
It's an interesting question.
It is interesting. And it's interesting that, in many organizations, it seems to me that HR has disproportionate power for a role that should be supportive of the overall functioning of the organization, right?
Yeah.
Esther and Johanna, this is Malcolm. If I could just interrupt for a second, one way to answer your question would be HR is an instrument of management. HR is not on the side of the employees, they're on the side of management and executing management's goals. And so they're basically a stand-in for a larger set of assumptions that management has put in place, which is why since they're their enforcers, they're the people you're talking to, but they're really only doing the bidding of people who are actually making policy. So that's why we may be talking about HR, when indeed I suspect you wanted to talk more about management not seeing the forest for the trees and assuming that having everybody be busy means they were all being productive. So that would be my 2 cents.
Well, I tend to agree that management represents the corporate interests, particularly when it comes to any sort of dispute between the corporation and individual employees. I mean, that is, clearly the case. And HR also should be in a role of supporting the organization getting the work done by creating policies that affect, the way people are hired, the way people are paid, the way jobs are classified, and so forth and so on. So while I agree that they are acting to protect the corporation's interests, and fairness is actually one of them that, is a necessary thing to protect, to avoid getting hauled into court. They have, particularly in large organizations, they actually do carry a lot of weight in terms of policy and setting what those policies are going to be.
And in my experience, managers have little to no idea that there could be a different policy, right?
Yeah.
So even if, as you say, Malcolm, HR implements management policies, too few managers realize they have choices. All right. Oh, I like this next one, Esther. Busy people are usually busy for a long time. How much learning time do they need to start planning in their schedule? If I may, I'm going to start off here and say, why would you not plan to learn something every single day? I mean, why would you make a break? Why would you take a break from learning to implementation? I mean, why not plan to learn as you proceed? I think I'm missing something.
So I sometimes, I don't do this all the time, but there are periods of time when I just plan in, I'm going to spend an hour a day reading, right? I have the freedom to do that. So that's sort of planned learning, but I also learn all sorts of things in surprising ways when I'm doing something else that, I don't know, isn't, set aside for learning time, when I'm just working on something, or I'm having a conversation about something, or I'm trying to, figure out how to say something. I learn stuff all the time, and I can't always predict when it's going to happen. Right. But I try to be open to it. Right. And that requires some freedom from constant time pressure and constant pressure to, ship something, anything, no matter what sort of shape it's in. It requires some time to be able to say, oh, I just figured out this really important thing, and it has an impact on this whole thing I've been doing. So I need to go back and do a little refactoring to incorporate this new learning into it. And that's not necessarily accounted for in many organizations. That, what you learn now may cause you to want to go back and change something that's already existing. So I think you need a little bit of spaciousness in terms of not being under relentless pressure. just relentless pressure, which is, very extractive and very counterproductive in the long term. I mean, this is going back to, our kind of hangover of traditional management thinking of extracting maximum labor from people. If people are busy all the time, you're trying to squeeze that last bit of work out of them, but you're also squeezing out much of the opportunity for learning, because that requires some, time to reflect, some time to think, some time when you're not under pressure. Because I think as pressure goes up, learning tends to go down.
So one thing I often recommend is that teams spend an hour a week learning, that they take literally an hour and say, we are going to learn something together this week. And this is our time, right? This 1 hour time box. That's when we will learn. And that's one way to manage the pressure, is that that 1 hour of time is not, you cannot allocate work for that time. That's outside of work. And then I also have a lot of serendipity when I learn, because you and I both read broadly. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I find I learn a lot when I walk and I listen to my podcasts. So it's something, I found something over here that helps me explain it over there. I mean, it's not directed learning, it's not specific, and I still learn a ton. So I think that a lot of our organizations have forgotten the obliquity that we need to encourage more, right? We are all of these questions have been from some perspective. If A occurs, then B will happen, and B is the outcome I want. And I find a lot of times I might want to finish. I want to get to B, but I need from A to C to F to G back to H, right, which is almost A, and I can finally make my way over to B. And and that's because I'm learning as I go. And I cannot predict I can't predict any of that.
So it's interesting you talk about the team having 1 hour a week to learn. And if if people are ostensibly at work for 40 hours a week, we all know that their, on task time is less than that. But even if you're saying, oh, they're only on task 30 hours of the week, that's what's the percent of 1 hour? That's minuscule. I mean, that's just such a tiny amount of time. I mean, and yet there's a lot of pushback against even setting aside 1 hour for learning. And it's a great way to not be intentional about learning in your organization. It's a great way, when you can't even set aside an hour, people will learn stuff kind of at random, but it's not going to be intentional and it's not going to be shared. And so you're not really getting much benefit of it. So I actually think more than an hour would be great.
More than an hour is much better, but at least 1 hour.
At least an hour. Man, if you can't even set aside an hour for learning, then, it's back to extraction, right? You're trying to extract the maximum out of the people who are there and not invest anything into making them better, which would actually benefit your organization.
Right. That goes back to our previous discussion of, if you only look at component team cycle time, you don't realize the entire time it takes. And if you say to people, you don't have time to learn, it's like you don't have time to test, or you don't have time to discuss.
Yeah, so I when I was a programmer, one of the I was working on maintaining a very large system and enhancing that very large system. And the manager who was working on some new thing, I don't remember what it was, he actually told, I guess it was a kind of a bolt on to the existing system, and he actually told everyone on his team that they should not spend more than 2 minutes speaking to people on the maintenance team because we had nothing useful to offer, which was so short-sighted. You know, we knew where all of the little problems were. We knew what people struggled with. We knew what stuff was like. You know, we knew a ton about that system that would have been super useful for them. But he cut off that avenue of learning because they don't have anything. They don't have anything to say. So it's pervasive. You know, this idea that you know, heads down, do your task rather than focusing on learning. Super short-sighted.
Yep.
Hey, Johanna, Esther, I just want to encourage everyone, since we have about 7-8 minutes remaining, if you want to ask something by voice, do not be shy, do not hesitate. Live questions always. Appreciate it.
7-8 minutes, time flies.
Joel, you have a question?
I do. I asked it earlier, but got missed, I guess. I do a lot of reading, and I bet a lot of us here do as well, and learning in other forms. And the more I do that, the more I feel like I'm drifting further and further apart from a lot of the managers that I interface with. And I just don't seem to be skilled at cultivating the curiosity that I have in them so that we can talk about the same concepts. It just feels like the more I learn, the more it can make my job frustrating because my colleagues are just not there with me. And I don't want to be a hot shot guy who knows it all so much as I do want to use that knowledge to do cool stuff, like, you know, change the world. But I just find myself repeatedly, doesn't seem to matter which company I go to. Maybe I have bad taste in companies, but they just don't have that appetite to read and learn like that. And it's frustrating. So any thoughts on how to cultivate more of a learning culture, especially within management?
Well, something I have done and that I find works for some people is, like, if I come across something really interesting and it's at least tangentially related to what we're doing, I'll just bring it up and I'll say, you know, I read this really interesting article. Here, I'll send you a copy. And then you know, I'll follow up. Did you get a chance to look at that? Isn't that interesting? You know, so I might, you know, if it's, you know, sort of related to what we're doing, I might do that. I might look at what the manager has on his bookshelf. When you can see that again, you can't always see it now that we're mostly remote, but, and read some of that and then ask questions about that.
That's a good idea.
Because, you know, people like it when you're interested in them and their ideas, and that makes it more likely that they'll reciprocate. And that might be a way to have a conversation, or, you know, read it and then say, you know, but I read this other thing that has a different point of view. And then maybe you can. Yeah.
I've tried something similar with, we have a shared, it's not Slack, but a Teams group that is for knowledge, like for learning. And I post a lot there. And I try really hard. Anytime anybody else posts something, I try to read it and write a response to say what I got from it. And I'm not trying to brag, but I think I'm about 100% in reading the things that have been posted, but it's not at all equal. Like I do that, but I'm not feeling the reciprocal response on the stuff that I post as much. And I just keep trying different things. Yeah, some.
Yeah,
but,
well, then I'd go with the energy, right? I mean, you know, it would be nice if everybody reciprocated and responded that way, but I would focus on the people who do.
Can I add something? And just on that point, because could I add something into that conversation, though? Sure. One of the things I've noticed, people learn differently, right? And sometimes they're listening to podcasts you are not listening to, or videos, right? Try to uncover those as well. Maybe it's not a book, or it's not a Medium post, blog post. Yeah, I've some people. I actually discovered recently one girl in my team has dyslexia, and she would never tell me. So I was like sending all these books for her to read, she wouldn't, and I didn't realize why.
So this is where
Good point.
Yeah, thank you, Bernie. This is where
Welcome.
I have found a lot of value in offering discussion with multiple mediums, right? I mean, being remote, we need multiple mediums right now. But just words in any shape, in any form, are often not enough. So I have said to some people, would you be willing to draw a picture based on what I read here? Could we examine this applied to our organization? And then sometimes people say, oh, that's a really interesting idea. Sometimes they say,
The thing about drawing a picture is it makes it an object that people could then, turn over and examine and look at as external from themselves, which is a super useful thing to do for learning. Just make it object so you can examine it and turn it over, figuratively turn it over and look at it.
And that way they don't have to admit that they're wrong or ignorant.
And it's less likely to become an argument.
Right.
Yeah, far less likely to become an argument when it's this thing out there, not inside, your perception about something.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, folks. We got just another minute. We may go over just by a few, but I know we then have a drastic drop and people have asked, to manage their time boxing expectations. So anyone wants to step up with another question we have?
Now's the time.
Yep, now's the time.
One question about being patient, maybe related to the questions before. I always experience many people get frustrated, which I'm trying to avoid on practicing of being patient. But is there a kind of like you are completely out of patience? something triggers which were like, no, this is going too far? Or being patient and practicing being patient is and relaxing a little bit more, it's the right way to do.
Well, I think patience is definitely a virtue, and particularly if you're in a large organization and you want to see change, you have to be patient because large organizations just change very slowly. They are designed to be stable. They are designed to be change resistant, not people being resistant, but the structures of the organization are that way. And so it takes an enormous amount of patience. And that doesn't mean you have to stay somewhere you're unhappy forever, right? There's a trade-off or a tipping point where for me, it's if I'm not learning, then it's time for me to move on. If I'm just seeing the same thing over and over again and I'm not able to make any headway on it, and I'm not learning, it might be time for me to go. But other people have different ways of weighing that.
I also use my personal values. So learning is a very big part of my personal values. But if the managers say one thing and do another, I often have trouble reconciling that. So, and if I am not able to work inside the system, I tend to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, very helpful.
Thank you, folks. We'll take another one, perhaps, if you don't mind.
I have a question, if you don't mind it.
Please.
Yeah. So this is Vlad, and thank you for this call. This is very helpful, and I'm not really an expert in that, and would like to get your opinion about this. Is a call about maximum business to maximum learning. Maybe I'm not quite so clever. I didn't get what maximum learning means and where is that maximum and how do we know we reached that maximum? Thank you.
I'm not sure I know where maximum is. I know when I'm not anywhere near it. And I know that when people focus on resource efficiency thinking, I often do not get enough learning or any learning at all. So I find thinking about where is the slack in the system so I can learn, and how can I amplify the learning so I get to where I want to go.
Yeah, I agree that it was ambiguous as to what we mean about maximum learning. It seemed like a snappy title, but you're right, it's ambiguous. And what the amount of learning that is possible in some situations may be quite small, but you can look at how you can make it bigger. So I think the maximum depends on you know, what the system is. And
I almost
yeah.
feel like your answer is whatever management allows that will be the maximum. Is that what you're trying to say, or it's different?
No, I think that well, yes and no. I think there are systems that are designed so or have evolved so that very little learning is possible. That doesn't necessarily mean that I personally can't learn in that situation. I can be in charge of my own learning, but whether as an organization or a system, that organization is going to take advantage of, you know, learning beyond individual learning, probably not. So yeah, you're right. There is something about what the, you know, what the system is capping the learning at. And, you know, then I look at what's my ability to influence that. I look at, you know, what can I learn as an individual? What can I maximize where I have some influence? But you're absolutely right. There are some systems where the learning seems to be very low on the priority for the management structure there.
Well, thank you, Esther, also for your version, and thank you, Johanna, for your version to the last question. I'm going to just walk on a limb and ask if someone has another. So that is if you have a few extra minutes. If someone has another relatively short question that you don't have to frame for, with many sentences, please drop it. Please ask. We'll time box it because people are dropping, people are asking too.
Seth, you had your hand up a moment ago. Do you want to ask a question?
It was less a comment, Johanna, less of a question, more of a comment. It was more just, I think Esther actually covered it when she responded just a moment ago. So when I was thinking about it myself, it was less about the maximum and more about maximizing the opportunities to learn in your work environment, which for most of us is actually, sadly, in the grand scheme of things, very difficult. And it was more that comment, carving out that space and that opportunity to learn, because most of us are busy just meeting deadlines all the time and the expectations of our leaders. But you both covered it very well, as always, on the course of this hour.
I decided a long time ago that I was not going to let anyone but me be in charge of my learning. And, so that meant that when I was a corporate employee, sometimes I used my vacation time to go take a course. Because I just, I wasn't going to let them determine what I needed to learn or what was useful for me to learn. But not everybody has the, other people have different constraints that might make that more difficult, but that was the stance I chose.
And I think it's also very important that the organization does not dictate what you read or listen to or watch. You have many options for increasing your learning, maybe not on the job, but certainly as you choose.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea that, some people advocate that, as a professional, you should be spending 20 hours a week outside of your job learning. I have certainly done that. I think corporations that don't incorporate learning it's just so short-sighted, right? They are losing so much potential. But on the other hand, I'm not going to let them say, you have no time during the work week to learn, so you don't get to learn. I refuse to live that way.
Right, me too.
And I'm still learning stuff every day.
I learned something this morning already. Yeah.
Oh, what did you learn this morning?
So I learned something about my writing where I could incorporate a new kind of way to describe something that I had not yet learned before. So yeah.
Well, I often read medieval history in the evenings. I'm not entirely sure why, but I recently read a history that it was not written from the point of view of retrospective coherence. So it wasn't like, oh, and the French nation state evolved because first there was this battle and then there was this battle, and so finding a clear line by looking backwards, but rather it looked at what were the influences that echoed from the Roman Empire, and how did that affect things, and what did those things make possible, and how did things develop differently where the road system and the city system of the Roman Empire wasn't prevalent. And that engendered so much thinking about how things evolve in organizations. It was just really super fun. So I learned a lot from that particular book on medieval history.
Yeah. Cindy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quick, I know there's a lot of companies right now that are rethinking everything. And so I work for a very large bank, and even in this bank, they are valuing the fact that we are working far too hard because we're all at home, and they want us to take breaks, and they want us to learn, whether it's Chase stuff, or that's my company, or other things in the company time. They want us to do it on our clock, not do it outside in our vacation, which is what a lot of us were doing. So I just wanted to say really quick that companies are looking at it and they're thinking about it, and it's not like it used to be before the pandemic. So that's all. I just wanted y'all to know.
Well, chaos is always an opportunity for change, and we went through a big old dose of chaos with the pandemic, and many people being in the situation of working from home. Not all of us could do that, but many of us did. So that period where everything's in flux is a great time to make change, because a lot of the strictures and constraints are broken or different, or at least loosened up. So that's good to hear.
Which means we can make change now, right? For this, whatever this new normal thing is. I don't think we know what that is yet. And I am very excited to see what changes might arise.
Yeah.
Well, great. So I'm really excited to have this, this session. I got quite a few offline pings really asking for follow-up. I'm not going to push my luck, and I'm not going to ask for it now, but we'll work about this. We'll discuss this offline. I just want to really put out my own thank you, my gratitude to both of you, Esther and Johanna, for finding the time on this. I'm sure you have other things to do on the weekend, for coming out and spending time with our audience, fast growing, big, active audience, but still it's your personal time, and it's a weekend. So we certainly appreciate this. Other than needed, I'll try to save this recording very soon and make it available. Any additional assets in between now and today, I guess tonight, feel free to share more than I already have, and I'll include in the circulation with all the links and blogs and podcasts that you are running. So that's really my one and only closing comment. And thank you all for joining.
Yeah.
And asking.
Thanks for spending Sunday with us.
Thanks all for being here. This was great.
Yeah.
And please stay safe, yourself, your families, and enjoy the summer. And we'll be back in touch very soon. Thank you very much, Johanna. Esther, once again, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Great pleasure.